Feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at MAYAAkai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. And we're doing a special college series. So normally I'd be like, this is episode would be 14, but we're kind of taking a little hiatus from episodes and focusing on something that's near and dear to me, which is kind of preparing our future, our youth, for those challenges and obstacles they have so they don't often make the same mistakes that we make. So I decided to do a 3-part series where we would really talk about how to prepare. I said we have to change our language and our thinking and not say our children, but say young adults, because it is a step forward. And one of the biggest and most life-changing moments in their life, whether it's going away to college, whether it's starting college, whether it's life after high school, either way, these are all things that are really important. And so my college career series, really 3 parts, addresses that. So normally I would say to you, grab, your favorite spot, get comfortable, grab your beverage of choice, coffee or tea. This is you and me time because it's all about you, but it's really not really about you. It's about either your children, young adults, and or maybe someone you think you can share this with that is in this situation. Either way, I think it's great information, and thank you for everyone who's sharing. FYI, if there's those times where this is a lateral conversation that we can talk about high school freshmen, I will insert that into the conversation because this is also a big transition for them. And given the pandemic, it's probably been one of the most challenging moments for high schoolers, period, as well as individuals going away to college. So before we jump into that, remember, you can always listen to episodes of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, at MAYAAkai.com. And remember, with almost every episode, there's going to be a podcast companion, which means you can go to MAYAAkai.com, click on podcast resources, just go to that particular episode, and I give supplemental information that you can read through, share, things like that. Also remember that if you're not listening to episodes of M.A.Y.A on MAYAAkai.com, you can always go to your preferred podcast platform. You can find me on iTunes, Google, as well as iHeartRadio, and hopefully, cross our fingers, Amazon Audibles soon as well. But of course, I prefer for you to go to MAYAAkai.com. I'm just going to give myself a little shameless self-promotion on that. And of course, always get social with me. Most people do follow me. You can find me at Maya_Akai on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, Facebook is Maya Akai Presents. So that's all the ways that you can connect with the show. So with that being said, this episode of my college career edition, this is part 2, is making the adjustments with self and the world around you. Because that's really what college is about, those adjustments with yourself and getting even more connected with yourself and getting even more connected with the world around you, which they're kind of interconnected, very much so. But before we get into this episode, I quickly, I always like to recap things and say, hey, you know what? Remember in episode, whatever we discussed this? Well, in part 1, it was the top 5 challenges that most college freshmen face. Okay. And remember, those things were academic difficulty, homesickness, social adjustments, picking a major, and dealing with financial issues. Those were the things that we talked about in those top 5 challenges. And I did say when we jumped into this next episode that I wanted to expand specifically on the social adjustment piece and self-identity, because obviously we know those are huge for many of those. Let me just say this. I know I get to be all chatty Cathy with everybody, and I'm sure you enjoy hearing me talk, but I always feel it's important to bring in an expert beyond my thoughts. And so joining me this episode is going to be board certified behavior analyst. And this is someone who I have known, since childhood. Even through college. So this conversation is going to be really interesting because we have a lot to share. Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi. I'm going to get it right. We talked about her name. And there's a story behind that too. I was like, you know what? I want to make sure I get this right. So give me my phonetics. Ulezi. Got it. There we go. She is the founder and CEO of a behavioral, it's more than just a behavioral analyst type agency. They do a lot of different things, and we're going to talk about that with her. So she is going to jump on. Here she is right here. Look at her. There you go. Had to pull a picture out and share it to kind of help me expand the conversation and make it more than a one-way conversation. So without further ado, I might as well go right ahead and bring her on, because we're going to jump into talking about, more importantly, those adjustments that college freshmen are making from a sense of social adjustment and self-identity. Without further ado, here she is, Dr. Nasiah.
Oh, Maya, thank you for having me on. It is a pleasure, privilege, and honor. And just let me give some of your viewers, your listeners, the background. I have known Maya most of my life.
Yes.
We met, let me tell y'all how we met. We both grew up in Joliet, Illinois. We both attended Catholic school, and we were both athletes. We met on the basketball court. We were in the same conference. Maya was a point guard and I was a center. So that was our childhood. We met on the basketball court.
I'm gonna tell you what's funny. When you say that I'm an athlete, some people laugh at that because they actually can't imagine it. They're like,
wow.
They're like, you played basketball. I was like,
athlete.
Actually,
Maya was her.
Was actually really good. But people struggle with that. I'm like, okay, I get it. I probably don't seem like I played that kind of sport. But yes, I was actually a really decent basketball player. But you're right. Yeah. This is we met in childhood. And there's so many conversations about identity, even that we've been waiting to do this together for a while.
Yes.
And because we said so much of our identity was forged in environment.
Absolutely.
An environment. And this is why that conversation about when we send young adults away, like I said, we're going to stop calling them children. That's the first thing that parents have to do in their adjustment shift is, yes, they will always be your baby. We know that. Mm-hmm. But you also want to cultivate that mindset that they are young adults. So they also can begin to make, language is important. Talk about that before we really jump into talking about, obviously, social adjustment and self-identity. Really talk about with people how language makes a difference in perception of the world.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, you already let everybody know I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And a lot of my work really does consist of not analyzing just our physical behaviors, but our verbal behaviors. Because you are right. Language constructs our reality. Language really creates our reality. So when we call it tacting in behavior analysis, but when we call or tact an individual a child, what do? We tend to relate to them as a child. But really, we should move away from calling our young people children once they get, really, before they get to the age of 18, we should transition and up-level our language so we can start viewing them as young adults. And let me say this, I know it's not easy. I have a 21-year-old, and pair that with a culture, I'm from a culture as a Black American that we use that word child or children kind of in reference to people that are younger. I've had to remind myself, I am not dealing with a child. This is not a child. This is a young man. And I will tell you, when I do that, I have to shift in my mind. It really does create a different image in my mind of who my son is. And it really is at this point, because he's still a young adult, I'm prompting myself, he's not a kid. He's not a kid. Even in reference to his friends, I say things like, how is that kid doing? It's not a kid. Some of these young people already have their own families and adult lives they're working.
And that's
correct.
That's the key thing. It's like, it's so easy once you get to be older, or you have obviously your children, to always want to see them in that light of being your child. But if you're truly preparing them for their life journey, you have to help them make those transitions. And let's be honest, titles go along with it. So, that's why we have child and adolescent and, young adults and adulthood. We go through all these different lifespans when we talk about this from a behavior or psychological standpoint. Yeah. So I think one of the first things that parents can do when they send their young adult away to college is to make that acknowledgement, even to say, well, you're officially a young adult now.
Yeah.
Are you ready for this? And they'll be like, what?
That's absolutely. And I would say definitely, Maya, once they get to college, but I have a feeling your audience is pretty woke.
Yes.
I bet these listeners are woke. You know what, y'all? And we're going to talk about it today.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start this journey way before.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start transitioning that, because that piece can present with some barriers if we wait too long.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really wish that I had started with the end in mind with my own son.
Mm.
What I mean by that is really embraced that piece of adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
I think many of us, because we live in a culture where we're not present,
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of we don't really recognize that we need to, from the very beginning, think about the end and
Mm-hmm.
prepare our children for that adult space in life, because that's where they're going to live most of their life, not as children. We
Yes.
live most of our lives as adults, and we're
Yes.
talking about college today. College can be an incredible gateway to that adult life.
Yes, it can. And it's interesting you say that. That's a good thing to put in perspective, is that think with the end in mind. And most people don't think about, you spend most of your life in adulthood, that childhood and adolescence is such a small portion. It's not even technically a quarter of it, if you think about it.
Yes.
It's not even a quarter of it, where even though it's some of the most richest part of your foundational experience, but that's not where you spend most of your time. So it's interesting to kind of challenge people to think of the end, which is you are actually producing an adult. You're not producing a child. They come into the world that way, but they don't stay in that position very long.
No. And M.A.Y.A, I mean, we should have a 3-4 part series on this, because we have some stories. When you think about that freshman year, and where people, I mean, think about our freshman year together, because we had our freshman year at the University of Iowa was together.
Yes.
Think
Yes,
about the people who got tripped up, who ended up leaving, who didn't thrive. It was because they didn't have the tools to navigate life as a young adult.
And this is part of, you're right. It's a lot of those people.
They were brilliant. These were brilliant people. But
that's true. And what you're saying, and I think this light bulb should go off for everybody listening, is that college is more than about your intelligence. Before we move forward, I always say I have a working toolbox for my listeners. There's different things we put into our toolbox. And the one thing I tell people to take out every single episode, I say, let's check your temperature on this. I need for everyone to take their emotional intelligence out the toolbox, because I need you to be able to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions for yourself and others. And it's one of the most important tools that you can begin to, I don't know that you ever master it, because we're human. So sometimes we regress, and then we gain ourselves, our focus again, and then, we can move forward. But it's important to be able to identify, I regress because this made me feel this way.
Yes.
Or the term we like to say is, I got my feelings about this.
Yes.
So to speak.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So this is that one thing every single episode, again, putting on the table, we're putting back out emotional intelligence. And as we have this conversation, check your temperature, because we're going to get into some topics that might ruffle little feathers, because we're talking about potentially your baby, your child, and things they're going to experience. And I'm going to need you to think of them as a young adult on a path that's going to definitely be a large part of who they become moving forward. So emotional intelligence, everyone, take it out, look at it, turn it around, and sit it on the table.
Absolutely. All right. Maya, can I get deep for a minute? I just want to go deep.
Well, that's why we're here. That's why we're here.
Let me just talk about this for a minute, because I fell into this category. And right now I'm talking to everybody, but specifically right now, I want to talk to our middle class parents who have a tendency to what's called helicopter over their young people. Now let's talk about this for a minute. When I say helicopter, it's kind of always being there and kind of micromanaging every move. Let's talk about high school. Let's talk about our, freshmen, A lot of us, especially those of us who are accustomed to a certain lifestyle, we want our children to grow into that lifestyle. I'm thinking middle class. What we tend to do when it comes to education is we micromanage it, and we don't give our young people the tools they need to take ownership of their education. So what do I mean by that? If you are a parent and you have a 14, 15, 16-year-old, and you're still at the point where you're standing over them to make sure they get their homework done, today I want you to stop, because you're setting them up for failure. What I mean by that, many of the young people that Maya and I went to college with that were not successful at the University of Iowa were brilliant. These were, it's a good school. So these were young people who came from Illinois, Iowa, who were at the top of their classes, but they didn't have the self-motivation to be able to sit and study without a parent over them. So today, my first piece of advice, and this is deep, if your child is at the top of their class, and that's contingent upon you staying on them, standing over them to make sure they get their work done, I'm going to tell you this, and I need you to hear me because I'm dropping a gem right now. It has little value in the real world. Because when they get in an environment, and when you talk about college and a child going away to attend college or a university, there is nobody that's going to do that. There is nobody that's going to stand over you to make sure you do your homework, you get that paper written. So what this is going to mean, parents, and I get it because I was there, what that's going to mean, I want you to let go of some of that control earlier, okay? I need you to understand they may get a C instead of the A. That may happen, but that's okay, because what you want is for them to do it on their own. You want to start shaping those skills. Again, do not. In my profession, I'm a behavior analyst. We call that prompt dependency. So prompt would be you standing over them, get it done, get it done. Did you do it? Did you do it? That was me. That was me. And guess what? I produced a 4.0 student. But that does not mean a hill of beans unless that student can take that skill into another environment and execute that skill to fluency without a prompt. And that's what you want to get at.
There you go. This is perfect because this segues right into our first kind of talking point we have. So remember, this is M.A.Y.A. It's a special college career episode. This is part 2, making adjustments with self and the world around you. And we're focusing on college freshmen, but you know what? There's going to be some lateral conversations for high schoolers in there as well, especially right now when we're talking about a lot of students are having to e-learn and parents are complaining like they're struggling. And what you just said, see, here's the difference, I think, when it's all said and done, Nasiah, is that my mother never stood over me and said, you better do your homework. She just said, you better do your homework. And that was it. And she never for one moment, do you think I didn't do my homework? No, because I knew if I didn't do my homework, one, somebody, because we were in private school, so somebody would call to say, Miss Gavin, by the way, things you don't know about people, M.A.Y.A is my middle name. People actually think Akai is my last name. And I'm like, actually, no, my full name is M.A.Y.A Akai Monet Gavin. So when people say M.A.Y.A Gavin, they said, who's M.A.Y.A Gavin? I said, that's me. It's my last name. I said, but I use M.A.Y.A Akai. That's my persona when I do my radio stuff.
Yes, I love M.A.Y.A Akai.
And I thank my mom for my name all the time. I do. I said, I really love my name. I'm like, you did a fantastic naming me. But the thing is, what you just said is exactly what my experience was. My mother, my grandmother did not stand over me and tell me to do my homework. No. They didn't. I automatically was trained that it was important to do it. and go forth and do it. And if I got a bad grade, then obviously I'm not doing something. And the first question is, do you not understand something, or are you not doing the work? Because those are two different things.
Yes, absolutely.
Two different things. And so when we talk about, one of the first things, the talking points, is what independence and autonomy looks like and feels like for young adults, aka college freshmen or even high school freshmen. You just nailed it on the nail on the head, because the bottom line is that, and we talked about this, is that in high school, everybody will be your safety net. So-and-so didn't turn their homework in. Parents will get an email. A teacher may call a parent. Maya's not turning in her work. Nasiah's not turning in her work. And then you try to right the ship. Whereas in college, if you don't go to class, if you don't turn in work, nobody's checking for you and you will fail out. And the difference is, and I said this in part 1, the school is not going to call you as a parent and tell you what's going on. And if you call as a parent to inquire, guess what? You now have a young adult who has autonomy, and they will not share information with you, even if you're footing the bill. It doesn't matter.
They will not. And that, for a lot of parents, is a hard pill to swallow. This is it, because I myself experienced this. Most parents don't want their children to fail at anything. But I'm going to drop another gem for you, okay? Your children should fail at a point in their life where there's still ability for you to help them. So again, going back to thinking forward, if we have our high school parents here, it's okay if your children aren't successful at everything they do, but teach them to fluency. So fail when it's easy. If you have a college student, what I recommend, and I guess we'll get into this later too, get real about the college experience. And if you have a college student who is at the university now or doing online, and they're not thriving, what I urge you to do is reevaluate why they are in college. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants their child, their young adult, to go to college. That is very much a part of our culture.
Yes.
But guess what I have learned? I've learned that a young person who is not thriving in college, let's reevaluate. Why don't we take some time and work? There is nothing that will clear you up faster than a job where you don't necessarily like, and you're making minimum wage. That clears you up. It helps you to really get in touch with what it is you want to do. Parents, if it don't fit, don't force it.
Don't force it. And that's the thing. People get so excited about the idea of their young adult being a college student. You know what it is? Most people send their young adult forth into college without giving them the proper tools to be successful. Everybody wants you to decide a major. How many people do you know declared a major and either switched it while they were in college, got a degree that they can't use? When I hear people say, oh, so-and-so is going to school to be an art teacher, and I said, and so-and-so going to be unemployed. Because if you were paying attention, real talk, if you were paying attention, you know that the arts, music, arts, and even sports to a degree are being cut out of a lot of school curriculums. So why would you allow your young adult to go major in something where they can't make money? And then you talk about debt. Well, you're instantly building them into debt if they have loans, because you allowed them to major in something that made no sense. So this is where we lateral this back to high schoolers. When you're, and I don't know what term, if we're calling college students young adults, how should we refer to our high schoolers? We should no longer call them just children. Adolescent is so kind of cold.
I say the youth.
The youth. Okay, our youth. Our young people. There you go.
They're young people.
Our young people, right. So I'm like, you don't want to say young adults because they already think they're adults as it is. So we got to be careful. The language we use with high schoolers is equally as important as the same, language we use with college students, because a lot of high schoolers believe that they can make decisions and choices that make sense, but we all know that they can't. What would you say Because right now, here's a chief complaint. I hear this repeatedly from people, but you just said something I think is important about not being a helicopter parent. At the same time, I also term don't be the free range parent either, like them just
Yeah.
go forth amok with no guidance. You got to
Yeah.
find that happy medium. You know what I mean? So for the
True.
people who are complaining about their kids struggling with e-learning, what would you recommend is something they can do? Because I think this is a great time to help your children, whether they're in grade school or high school, to
Yes.
actually develop some study skills. To be honest, they may not have gotten under these circumstances. What would you recommend as a behavioral analyst to people who are struggling with e-learning at home with
Absolutely.
the youth?
There you go. Well, and actually, you're giving me some ideas. We may need to do another show just
Oh,
on
okay. We
Let
can.
me let me tell you, e-learning. First, I wanna commend all of the parents who are in the who are engaging in e-learning at this point. I commend you. It's not easy. This is what I will say. Now, I could speak at every age group, but I'm going to specifically talk about your high school children with your high school young people with e-learning. What I'm going to suggest is first and foremost, parents, give yourself some grace around e-learning because it isn't easy. The second thing I'm going to recommend is really help your young person take ownership over their work. So if you are in a environment where you find yourself having to constantly prompt them, do your work, do your work, do your work, I'm going to ask you to relax just a little bit around the e-learning. And I want you to set some very achievable goals around e-learning.
Hmm.
Let's talk about this, that balance. I was an educator in the public school system for more than a decade, and I was a administrator in the public school system for an equal length of time. What I will tell you, if your expectation is for your young person to sit in front of a computer screen all day, what I'm going to tell you is that's not a realistic expectation. And what you're going to end up doing is just bumping heads. Both of you, the parent and the young person and the teacher, is going to be set up for failure. What I ask that you do is set some achievable goals. Look at what the school, what the teacher is asking your child to do. And I know on paper, some of it is, okay, we're going to have e-learning all day. No. What we can do, if you have math, science, social studies, we can realistically expect from our young people is look at each of those subjects and allocate a certain amount of time per day. I recommend looking at it, looking at what the young person has to do and saying, okay, we're going to allocate this amount of time for this class, and that includes any homework that is recommended or assigned. But what we don't want to do is have the expectation that we're going to replace 6 hours of live instruction, in class instruction, with 6 hours of online. It's not realistic. So what I'm recommending is manage expectations around e-learning. It's not going to have point-to-point correspondence as in-person teaching and learning.
Yes.
So
Yes.
cut that time down, look at the assignments, and then start holding your young person accountable. You'd be surprised, young people, when you give them some freedom and some flexibility and
structure and the structure.
the structure is there, and
Mhm.
they have a voice in creating it, you'd be surprised how that changes your outcomes. But when you tell them, do this, you're going to sit in front of this screen, you have this assignment, do it. That human beings don't work that way. Whether you're older or younger, we don't work like that. But when you can structure things, okay, work together, okay, you have this to do. This is where we can meet you in the middle. And again, giving them some voice in what's being done, that changes everything. And the last thing I say about this is kind of what's changed around education or what needs to change. Parents, when you see your young person, struggling to sit in front of a computer screen 4 hours at a time, let's have a conversation with the young person and the teacher.
Yes.
And let's include our young person in that conversation so we can begin to problem solve. Out of this conversation, what I do want to make sure, Maya, is that everybody understands that in this educational realm, we all need to have a voice. With e-learning, what I'm seeing is parents just taking it and not really pushing back at the teachers and the educational system and saying, well, wait a minute, what exactly is it you want me to do? And I won't even say pushing back at the teachers, because the teachers are doing what they're told to do.
Giving feedback, though. Giving feedback.
Yes.
They're just pretty much complaining to others, but that's not being an advocate for whether it's a child, whether it's your young high schooler. You're the advocate at this point. You're the one who can notice, you know what, my child, because here's what I can tell you. Everybody's not an e-learner. I've done both. I've had e-learning classes going through my master's degrees. I've had brick and mortar classes, meaning sitting in class. And I'm gonna tell you something, I'm more of a brick and mortar person. I like the engagement and conversation, as do most people. But I'm perfectly fine as an e-learner. I can get my work done and it doesn't distract me. But the other piece to this is know that whether it's your child, younger children, I think it's more difficult for them because they don't spend the amount of time on technology as maybe a junior high student or a high schooler does. Trust me, if you gave a high schooler 8 hours to Snapchat, TikTok, do whatever it is, you know what? Play a video game, they can do all that. So my thing is, real talk, they have the ability to focus on doing schoolwork. This is not something they desire to do. That's the problem. It's not a desire. If it was something they wanted to do, it's not a setback for them. So understand the first obstacle I feel you're dealing with e-learning right now is your kids don't want to do it. Now, what I noticed also, Nasiah, is that you have some people whose children are not struggling at all with e-learning, even though they prefer to be in class. But you know what's interesting about most of those individuals? They were relatively good focused students before the pandemic happened. They weren't struggling. So they realized this is just a situation that I have to deal with because of the pandemic. It's important to frame what the situation is, why you have to learn this way for right now. What I feel is I think a lot of parents transfer their anxiety to their children.
And it's anxiety provoking. I recognize that, but that's a big part of what is happening. Let me tell you too, and this is a skill. I'm dropping a gem here. Everybody, open your mouth, and I get you're venting to colleagues, you're venting to family members, but really advocate for yourselves and your young person, and most importantly, have your young person with you as you advocate and they advocate for what they need in regard to e-learning. Because what I'm seeing a lot of is nobody is asking a lot of questions around the pedagogy, how it's supposed to happen. And I recommend at this point we do that so we can become powerful role models in teaching our young people how to advocate for what it is they need regarding e-learning. And I say that because I don't know how long this is going to last. So if this is not working for your young person, get vocal and get in communication. And that's a powerful teaching tool. Don't do it out. If you have a young person that you're working with, 14, 15, they should be a part of that conversation.
Very, very much so. Very much so. This is part 2 of our special college careers edition. And this part 2 is making the adjustments with self and the world around you. We're focusing obviously on that transition, being a college freshman, that challenge that's there. Well, like I said, there'd be lateral conversations in regards to a lot of high schoolers are dealing with some similar issues. And it's also a big transitional point for high schoolers to go from junior high, middle school, however you're structured, to high school. There's a lot of exploration and change in that as well. And of course, I said I would not just kind of talk here by myself. I brought on an expert, certified behavioral analyst, Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi. Did I get it right that time? There you go. Ulezi. I'm saying it slow. I'm like pronouncing it.
You know what? Can we give everybody some background? Because you can do this too, Maya.
You know what it is? You know why I'm struggling, right? Because I'm fighting. You know what I'm fighting not to do, right?
I know what you're fighting, so I'm going to give you some freedom around it. My Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi is a name that I gave myself. Maya did not grow up calling me Nasiah because that's not my given name. My name was Sean Virginia Robinson. Mm-hmm. So Maya knows me as Sean. So I'm going to give you some freedom. You can just call me Sean. And my family and the people who have known me as long as Maya has, they call me Sean. And again, we could tie that name change right into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, we'll roll that into that. So let's kind of jump into that, what independence and autonomy looks and feels like as a young adult. So while we were talking about schoolwork and when you said don't be a helicopter parent, is because if your children, young adults, high schoolers, don't develop the skill sets of how to study on their own and how to be disciplined, they're going to go to college as young adults and fail because there will be no one standing over them to make sure that they can do this. So with that being said, let's kind of move into that separation anxiety that comes with, and this exists even a little bit as for a high school freshman as well as a freshman in college, because obviously when you leave home to go to college, you miss your parents, though you don't necessarily want to admit it. Your parents miss you. In most cases, you're not going to college with friends. So now you're into a large pond with people you don't know. And for those who are just entrenched in what they believe is the only love they'll ever know in their lives, they're often leaving behind a boyfriend or girlfriend, or they may be going to a whole nother school themselves. So now there's that anxiety of, we're going to break up. It's not going to work. And you know how that plays out one way or the other. Because the key thing about this particular separation anxiety is that the comfort, convenience, control has shifted from certainty to uncertainty, even when it's college. Because believe it or not, for high school freshmen, it's a similar situation. Sometimes you're lucky you may go from a middle school or junior high with some of the same people, sometimes, but in other cases you may not. So there's still kind of that challenge of adjustment, but it's a bigger challenge to me when you go to college.
It is. It is. Oh, I want to speak on this because when we talk about everything that you just mentioned, the change, the discomfort that comes along with that, the unfamiliarity, all of those really speaks to our society's relationship with changes. Ours as a culture, how we deal with the unfamiliar. Now, as human beings, typically the way we deal with things that are different, the way we deal with things that are unfamiliar is a lot of times escape and avoidance. We tend to withdraw from them. We're hesitant to seek those experiences out. What I have found in my life and through just lived experience, living on this planet for 49 years, I have found I've had to develop my skill set around change, around dealing with things that are unfamiliar. And if we are able to do that with our children, and if we are able, Maya talked earlier about language, if we are able to really teach our young people that these changes are opportunities. These changes are opening doors. This unfamiliar is really a blank canvas where a young person has an opportunity for discovery. Discovery of who they are, discovery of what it is they like, discovery to be more fully present in their life. That is a very different feeling than fear, than kind of avoidance, than the unfamiliar. So a lot of what our parents, our just the older, wiser people in the lives of young people, what we can do is really change our own conditioning around the experience of change. You know, let me tell you, after 49, you see this fan.
Oh, I can identify with that. I get that. I get that feeling. I understand totally.
Okay, this is I am still in my life. I'm evolving and changing. And what I have decided to do is embrace that as an opportunity. I will tell you, each stage, I'm committed to being the best I can be at each stage of my life.
Best version of yourself. That's what M.A.Y.A is all about. My ambition, your ambition is about being the best version of yourself you can be. It doesn't mean you forget who you were. You got to keep those things, tucked away so you don't lose sight of where you came from to how you got to where you are.
Right.
But one of the things I always kind of say, I love taking other people's cliche sayings, is that where your focus goes, your energy will follow.
Yes.
I was like, so if you are the type of person, and remember, your children tend to do something we call scaffolding in psychology. They will mimic, they will mirror you. So if you are often a highly anxious person, or if you look at everything from a negative perspective, that's what your children begin to internalize and they grow. I talked about attachment styles in some of my earlier episodes. I said, just because maybe you were shaped that way, you are human clay. You can reshape yourself anytime you want to. You are now the architect of who you want to be moving forward. And you can erase the lines, you can build up, you can add on additions because it's you as an adult. And most people seem like they relinquish that so easily, assuming that everything is fixed. Nothing is fixed, and this is why people struggle with change. Change and challenge, if you read their definitions in the dictionary, have nothing to do with negativity. It's about a shift in something moving in a different direction. Challenge is something that is presented to kind of be in opposition, but it doesn't mean that it has to be negative. But when we hear words like change and challenge, we instantly are conditioned to believe this is going to make me uncomfortable. It's going to be inconvenient, and I'm not going to be in control. And anytime those three things are negated and people are pushed out their comfort zone, you only grow when you step out your comfort zone.
Oh, yes. Let me tell you, let me drop this gem too. And I'm talking to a lot of the parents. When you're a young person, when they leave home, when they leave, remember this, M.A.Y.A? You leave, and after that first semester, you come back, you're not the same.
No, you're not. You're not.
And you shouldn't be. And you shouldn't be. Now, you have on one end, you have the young person, they're going through their changes. And then you have the parent who they see the change, and the natural inclination is for many parents to try to hold on to who that young person was.
Yes.
The best thing you can do, let them grow and evolve. I think the tendency is, okay, this young person is changing, they're evolving. Oh no. But it could be oh yeah, okay. That after that first semester, there's no telling what that young person will evolve into.
And it's interesting because what you just said is, like you said, it's a gem, because if you don't think there's going to be a change, and here's the thing, a change doesn't mean that something is totally different than what it was. You know what I mean? I always say at the core of who you are, some things will always remain the same. You kind of just shut off some of the stuff that either really wasn't maybe your ideas or your desires, maybe things that were layered on you through, social learning, through your family, social groups, whatever the case may be, religious beliefs. And then all of a sudden you get to college, and this is the key thing. And this is kind of moves into our next conversation, expanding beyond who they think they are, breaking preconceived ideas of self, new influences, meeting new people, taking classes, instructors. All of a sudden, you start to shred away ideas. I mean, for me, I think about it. It was the first time that when I went away to school that I had the opportunity to take African-American history classes. And I took just about everyone they had. I took so many. I have a minor in African-American history. Because I was just like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And you know what? And that was a transformation piece for me, because don't get me wrong, I knew about Black history. We would go to DuSable Museum, but all the breadth and the depth I learned about Black history, that was the difference. And for me, that was such a transforming moment to say, here's all the things that have always been hidden.
Yes.
And we come from such an amazing, majestic, smart, intelligent, resourceful group of people. I'm not even talking about going back over to Africa. That's not what I'm saying. Right within this country, in America, there have been plenty of Black people who've done amazing things, but it's always been hidden away. And when you learn about Black history goes beyond, by the way, Martin Luther King, just so people know this. When you learn about so many things that Black people have achieved, it just elevates your awareness. And you're like, you know what? Okay. There's a whole world out there that I just didn't know existed historically about my people. That was a big changing point for me. What was a changing point for you?
Wow. It was so many things, up until, let me share this with you. I think that first night I was in the dorm because I left before. It was a group of us that went to Iowa from Joliet. I left before everybody because I did summer school there. So I left right after graduation. Maya, I remember the first night in the dorm, and I was in Stanley Hall.
Okay. I was in Burge.
Okay. We were right across the way. I was in Stanley. And I don't think I've ever had, even till this day, a more peaceful night's sleep.
Really?
I have never had a more peaceful night's sleep than I did that first night I spent, because what being there, just the entire experience represented for me was freedom. It was freedom.
Yes.
Freedom to just be me. I had never had that before, to the point where I didn't want to go back home, because when I went back home, my freedom was restricted.
Yes. And that's a whole nother piece about parents have to shift their thinking about their young adult, because now they've been away from you. And trust me, I understand still having rules. I get it. I get that. But you also have to be a bit more flexible in your thinking, because they've been doing plenty of things away from you that either you're going to approve of or not approve of. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But you can't treat them like they're a child, because they're a young adult who have now had that taste of freedom.
That's, the advice that I would give to parents, anybody who has a young adult who has made that shift, make space for their change. Make space and be flexible and understand they will come back different. So give them some of that room. There will be house rules. Until today,
right.
I'm 9 years old. There's a certain way of being I have to kind of buy into, I have to agree to, in order to be in my mother's home. That's life.
Right.
But there has to be a creation of space and room for your young person to really flourish and grow into a healthy adult. The rules shouldn't look the same at 14 as they do at 19 and 20.
You know what's interesting, and this is that we can lateral into some high school conversation to kind of, because you could be building up to this from the minute that your young high schooler goes in, they become a freshman in high school. So you're young, and obviously you still can't drive. So, you want to obviously give them some obviously rules. But I'm like, at some point, to be honest, my parents could leave me home at 12 and nothing was going to happen. I mean, you know what I mean? Now, I don't know today if I would leave most 12 years home. But then again, if it was my child, I might feel differently because I would raise them a certain way. But you should feel comfortable. Like if you need to go run to the store or go do something, say your friend asks you to go to dinner. If you don't feel like you could leave your 14-year-old at home for like a couple hours by themselves, something's wrong. Are you concerned that something's going to happen in your absence, like someone's going to break in the house or something like that? Or do you not trust them? You have to ask the hard questions. Am I not leaving you alone for a certain amount of time because I don't trust you, not the rest of the world? And if that's the case, why don't you trust them? Yeah. I mean, and then by the time you get to 16, you should have a whole nother kind of layer of things, responsibility you're giving them. Like I had a car at 16 and here was a rule. Here are the keys. You know exactly what time your curfew is. Don't be home late. And she goes, and don't be a chauffeur for people in your class, in your class, if they're not paying you gas money. That was the rule. Like, if people are getting rides from you, they should appreciate the fact that you're being convenient. And my mom just said, if no one ever offers you anything for driving them around, that's reflective of what kind of person they are. That was a really soft life lesson right there. It really was.
Absolutely.
It really was.
You know, Maya, I do remember this, and both of us were alike in this way. I remember you worked. You had a job during freshman year.
Oh yeah, I had a job. I had a job at 15. Here's the thing: I was itching to work, which is weird. I have no idea why. Because here's the thing: I was spoiled. I'm not gonna lie. I had an allowance. I was an only child. Life was good for me, but for some reason, I wanted to work. And my first job, and I can't believe they allowed us to do this because we were a bunch of high schoolers. In the evening, I worked at a nursing home. And I worked in the dietary aid, and they would assign me actual people that I had every single day, and I would bring their diets. I would set their trays up and everything. I'm like, I wouldn't trust a kid today to get that right for nothing in the world. And I maybe did that for a couple months, and then when I turned 16, I became an evening receptionist, and that was a job that I had throughout the rest of high school.
See, Maya, but the way you showed up, the way I showed up in freshman year, and we finished our degrees and then some, is, I think, a direct result of that early training. What I'm going to recommend to parents, whether or not you're in a financial position and your child does not need, or your young person doesn't need to work, get a job.
Yes.
They need a job.
You know what? It helps you to understand the value of money. And what's weird is, though I had a job, I actually never stopped getting an allowance, which I thought was weird. So my mom was like, here was her thing. She was like, just save your money. Yeah. So when I went away to college, I bought almost everything in my room. Because actually, I didn't have a roommate my freshman year. I was like, yeah, I don't want to live with people I don't know.
You live right, maybe 2 floors above me.
Right. But I was like, I don't want to stay with somebody I don't know. That was the only child in me. I was like, I'm not staying with somebody I don't know like that. So but then after that, I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool. See, that was a shift. I wanted to have a roommate come the next year because I was like, oh, it's cool. These people have roommates. And I was watching how they kind of got together and how they hang out. And I realized I was missing out on certain things because I didn't have a roommate. See, that was a growth point. But I bought all the stuff in my room. And actually, I had saved so much money from working. I didn't work like almost my first whole year. And I ended up getting a job towards the end only because I felt I had too much free time. And I felt that was distracting.
Got you.
So I
remember you working at Iowa. So it wasn't freshman year.
It wasn't. It was like it was second semester of freshman year. It's funny. Okay. I ended up getting a job at the Afro-American Cultural Center. Wow. And I worked there my entire time I was there. My last 2 years, I was the assistant manager. So it was a job that worked for me because you know what? People rarely showed up unless there was a reason. So I could sit down and actually do my homework.
Wow. It's so, can I just take a side note? I just have to do this. It's so wonderful. This is one of the benefits in my life about growing older and wiser, having old friends, having people who who've been on this journey. Maya, I so appreciate you and appreciate the fact that we've known each other so long.
So long.
I'm so just in awe of your accomplishments. Keep going. It's an honor.
Well, wait. Now we talk about accomplishment. I feel a little like kind of underachieving here when I'm sitting next to Dr. Nasiah, who by the way, besides the fact of her just being a board certified behavioral analyst, she's a doctorate degree in education from Loyola University in Chicago. She holds a master's degree in special education from University of Illinois at Chicago and a master's degree in educational leadership from American College. She completed advanced studies in infant and toddler studies at American Institute in Chicago. She's worked in the field of disability services for more than 20 years as a special educator, clinician, educational administrator, and professor of education. But when it's all said and done, she is deeply committed to anybody that she invests her time and energy in.
That's it.
I just want you to know my resume don't look like that.
But hey, at the end of the day, we are both awesome. And I gotta put this plug in. I think we look damn good for women who are.
I think I'm aging well. I do. And I've learned that's something else too. I'm learning to age gracefully.
Yeah.
Like I'm not letting the world outside me make me feel like this isn't good enough. So I want to go fix this or fix that. And that's something. And you know what? And that's something that you instill, especially in young people, really young. So when we're talking about that breaking conceived ideas. When your kids come home and it seems like they're different, let that sit where it is. Now, if you want to inquire, like, so, hey, how was that first semester? Because remember, it's new influences because it's a new environment, which means they're going to probably meet people who don't look like them unless they go to a more specialized school. So say you're Mormon. If you happen to go to a Mormon school, then everything is going to probably be as you know it. Or if you go to a Christian school, it's going to probably be more of how you know things to be. But when you tend to go to larger universities or state-run schools, then that's when you get into a bigger pond or ocean. So my thing is, I remember meeting people from Iowa who would say, it's like my last semester, I stayed in the Mayflower. Okay. I didn't have a roommate. I was on one side by myself because, there were quads.
Yes.
And two girls were on one side and they had two other friends that had come up them from, I can't remember where in Iowa. They were very nice. They were white, which was indifferent to me. But they were like, do you know you're the actual first Black person I've ever met?
Oh, yes. That was
They said in person, like they had seen Black people on TV.
Yeah.
They said in person, having a conversation.
Yeah.
I was the first Black people. And we're talking about these girls, we're talking about 18, 19 years old. And I'm the first person of color they had ever met. And I was like, oh. I was like, well, at that point, now, mind you, I'm like 20 something. I'm like, questions? I mean, since I'm the first person that you met, and the funny thing is they had a whole bunch of questions. Why do people revert to hair? I have no idea.
That's interesting. They do though.
They revert to hair. I thought that was weird. But they had lots of questions like, because I'm from Illinois, Chicago, so they had big city questions. But it was interesting. So for a lot of people, even if let's just say they've met Black people, but maybe they went to a school that was predominantly one thing. Now you get into a bigger setting and there's people of other cultures, religions, sexual orientations, the whole 9 yards.
Yes. Oh, we didn't touch on that. I know our time is almost up.
Yes, our time is almost up. We didn't even get into the whole, and you know what? It's probably best we didn't get into the sexual exploration and freedom piece because most parents aren't ready for that. Here's how this works. It's going to happen. You can't stop it. Just have a conversation about being responsible.
Yes.
Because you're a young adult now, which means be responsible. Just have the conversation, and don't ask things that you really don't want to know. That's the only thing I can tell you about that.
Absolutely. But it's coming, and that's part of it. There's a lot of orientation for the young people. Somebody needs to develop college orientation for the parent.
That would probably be a good idea. Okay. Before we end it, tell everybody a bit about your agency, what you do, because you offer a lot of services. I know parent support and education, therapy for young, IEP advocacy, school consultation, social skill groups. You do a bunch of stuff. Quickly tell us a bit about your agency.
Yes, Ulezi LLC. I call it's a community service, social service agency. It really is an agency that combines all my years of experience, all my different roles. So I do IEP advocacy. I do school consultations because I don't believe in schools and parents working against each other. We can work together on behalf of the child or the young person. I facilitate social skills groups primarily for young people who are on the spectrum, children and young people. And I also do a lot of coaching in organizations. I'm big on all organizations defining their values, mission, and vision to really function at a level that keeps them moving with integrity. So please reach out to me. Also, I have a YouTube channel too. It's called Ulezi the Advocate, and I drop gems on that YouTube channel. So please, if you are in need, reach out to me and I might be able to help you. And
right there, scrolling across the screen, Ulezi World, right there. You can go online and check everything out on her website to kind of get an idea of all the different services. I'm going to tell you something. A lot of people need the services you offer, especially if they have a child that has special needs and they have an IEP. A lot of things in here people could benefit from. I always say, don't think about it as I like it's language. I don't like saying mental health. It's about mental wellness. So it's all about the language you use to decide that you're going to get help, because you got to be comfortable with how you're thinking and feeling. So I think what you do with your agency is fantastic. So go check it out. And I guarantee you'll probably get some calls like, oh, definitely, I've got some questions.
Yes.
Thank you for joining me today. We could have talked for hours, and we're gonna have to do more of this, because I think as we roll through this pandemic, there are a lot of questions that people probably have about making adjustment for themselves. Remember, we talked a lot about today. Parents are struggling to adjust just as much as their young adults.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would love. Please, let's do some more collabs.
We'll definitely do more collabs. All right, everybody, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for tuning in. One more part 3 is going to be about financial challenges for college freshmen. That's a big one right there. Setting them up for success opposed to failure. Until next time, everyone, have a good one.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A Akai.com.